That's great. Thank you so much, Heather, for inviting me here today, and thanks to everybody for joining us. I hope you find our AGF story here to be of benefit. So what we thought we'd do today is just sort of do a very brief overview of what AGF does as a company, and then specifically, obviously, the PMO, the challenges we've had there, the approach we took to implementing a new PPM, how we came about selecting our solution and technology, some of the results and the benefits we've seen, and then Darren will be taking you through an Eclipse PPM overview as well, and of course we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. So just very quickly, AGF Investments is one of Canada's premier independent investment management firms. We have offices across Canada and subsidiaries around the world. Our products include a diversified family of award-winning mutual funds, mutual fund wrap programs, pooled funds. Those are for retail or individual investors. And we also manage assets on behalf of institutional investors, such as pension plans, foundations, and endowments, and private clients as well. We have about $36 billion in assets under management. We serve about 1 million plus investors, and we do have global offices with about 400 employees around the world. And, as with any organization, we have lots of projects on the go and lots of work that we need to have organized and track. So, I thought I'd talk about the current state of our PMO and where we're at today, and then take you through how we got there. So, we are in a centralized PMO function. Our team is actually called Solutions Delivery. We had rebranded from the Project Management Office moniker a few years ago because we wanted to sort of represent that we do the delivery part as well as the oversight on the projects as well. We do have executive leadership. So I report, and the PMO reports into our Chief Information Officer, who is also the head of our operations organization. And we are responsible for overall project delivery in the organization. So that includes product launches if we want to launch a new mutual fund or, bring on a new channel of investments. Our team is responsible for delivering on that. Technology implementation, so anytime there's a large technology change, whether it be something infrastructure related or whether it be a new application or service that we need to bring on to help our business, we'll be responsible for delivering that. And also process changes as well. So, if we sort of look at our new client experience or anything like that, our team will be responsible for organizing and delivering on that as well. From a PMO governance perspective, we have obviously reporting, which I'll get into a little bit later, and we have a formal monthly meeting with our executive where we go over a dashboard that contains major projects that we're working on, the status of those, any issues that we're encountering. Of course, those would be at an executive level, sort of not your day-to-day project issues, but things that they would be concerned of from a senior management perspective. We also review and approve business cases. So anytime the organization would like to spend money, capital, or incur costs from a resourcing perspective, we ensure that that's business cased appropriately and that gets appropriate approval and then prioritization as well. We go over resource forecasts as well, especially for the operations and IT folks and the shared services organizations to make sure that people are working on the right things and that it's aligned strategically with the organization and our priorities as well. And we also review project closure reports. So for the major projects, we do post-implementation reviews, and we'll share the results of those at a high level with the executive as well, particularly around lessons learned, so that we can, hopefully avoid any pitfalls in the future when we do future implementations. So the team is relatively small from a PMO perspective. There's about 4 full-time project managers, and we'll bring in contractors as required. We do have a project control administrator / officer as well. The group also has the business analyst team, so we have about 8 BAs and a manager there who we farm off to different projects. So it really is centralized, and we'll divvy up the team according to whatever projects are prioritized and approved and on the go. The team has specialization, so we will have people that work on, let's say, technology projects more than they would on a business process project, but we try not to bucket people too much, because we do like the flexibility of being able to assign people to various different projects. That helps from a capacity planning perspective, and it also helps from a cross-training and development perspective for the team as well. So we found that the centralization works really well with some specialization, especially when you get into some of the financial products. You do need a fair bit of background in asset management, how the markets work, et cetera. So, we will have people who are specialized in those areas, but they are quite flexible and able to work on different types of projects as well. How did we actually get there? So, prior to having this centralized PMO, we were a smaller group within the IT organization of the firm, focusing on a lot of technology projects, but we would branch out as required into different areas. And the way that we were tracking the various projects that were going on in the organization was really through everybody's favorite application, that's Excel. So we would track all of the projects, line by line, what was going on, dashboards, things like that. The projects would be updated weekly by each project manager. And again, these were more focused on IT at the time, and we started to see demand from outside of the IT group on getting some structure and organization around some other projects that were happening in the firm. So we would start to include some of those projects on the list as well. But it was really, much more limited to the people within the PMO, and it was IT at that time managing projects. We had challenges with the Excel and version control, so we had weekly team updates, and whoever was the first one in on the spreadsheet would save the next version. We didn't have a lot of consistency with how statuses were being tracked. Even from project to project, and certainly not from a portfolio level, there was very little consistency there. There was no real source of the truth, in the sense that, how could we validate that this status was accurate, whether or not it was complete? Maintaining that history was difficult, because you'd have to go back to previous versions of the spreadsheet and try and find that particular project 3 weeks ago. So it was very much a spreadsheet focused as opposed to project focused process and way of tracking these things as well. And like I said, there was very little consistency on the statuses and the metrics for each project as well. Everybody did a great job individually managing their projects, and we would, discuss best practices as a group, but they were never institutionalized formally. It was, however, somebody decided to classify the health of a project. We feel it's yellow or amber, slipping towards green now. Very little standards around that. And also from a resource perspective, there was little visibility into our resource utilization. It was really hard to determine how much time was spent on a project, in terms of forecasting as well, what type of resources would we need for projects coming up. It was very difficult for us to manage all of that through the spreadsheets and sort of through the ad hoc informal processes that we had. We also were starting to get more and more questions on how we were categorizing our projects, and we didn't have a very good way of doing that outside of just saying, okay, this is pure IT, or this is pure product, or this is sort of a marketing project. It was tough for us to start to categorize that. We were being asked for more and more reporting around it. So with all of those challenges, we fortunately had an executive sponsor that came along and was asking the question, well, what are people working on in the organization? We've got a lot of IT people. We have a few project people. What are they all working on? Is it pure projects? How have these projects been approved? How are they prioritized? And it was difficult for us to come up with consistent answers in an organized manner working off of spreadsheets. So we really recognized the need for some more clarity and consistency. And the actual driver originally was around the resourcing. What are people working on? How do we know they're working on the right things? How do we know that the projects are being organized properly and being reported on properly outside of the spreadsheets that we were using. So the executive that we had at the time, our Chief Information Officer, was asking us these questions and, you know, really recognized the need for some more clarity and consistency. And we were very fortunate in that, as with any project, one of the real keys to success of the project is having some good executive sponsorship, somebody who's engaged and interested and actually wants to move the agenda forward, which is what we had. So that was, you know, really a good starting point. And before we even started getting into the detailed requirements as to what this person was looking for and what we needed to do as an organization, we really took the time to understand, you know, what are our objectives here? What are we trying to achieve? And once we honed in on that we wanted more clarity around what people were working on, wanted more clarity around what type of projects we were working on, how they were going to be prioritized, and even some standardization around project management practices. Once we had those objectives in mind, we were able to sit back and start to look at, okay, how are we going to get there? So I was quite pleased when I joined AGF, and through this process, I found out that we actually had subscribed to Eclipse in the early 2000s in the organization, but it wasn't being actively used. So once I found that out, I thought, okay, great, this is a really good starting point for us because, you know, while the technology really shouldn't drive your process, I had used Eclipse in a previous organization, one of the large Canadian banks, and I had seen how successful it could be, particularly around the resource tracking, and I knew that was one of the pain points that we were trying to address. So what we decided to do was, you know, reevaluate the current technology. So let's take a look at Eclipse again. You know, let's leverage it because I had experience with it. You know, let's take a look at what infrastructure we need to support because at that time it was still hosted on premise. So, you know, there was some work that needed to be in terms of updating the application and virtualizing the servers. We, you know, instead of doing hardware in the old way it had been implemented. And, you know, we took the opportunity while we were looking at that was to standardize the project management practices as well. You know, this was the time where we all got together and said, okay, how are we going to represent statuses? How are we going to classify issues? So we took a fair bit of time to actually look at our processes and write them down and formalize them a little bit. So Eclipse, like I said, it was a great tool that I had used in the past. It's now owned by Upland, and you know they're a leading provider of cloud-based management software. Eclipse now is software as a service. It's got about 300 plus implementations and over 30,000 users as well. So you know we thought it was a really good natural solution for us to move to. And we actually invited the Eclipse team in to present formally to AGF and take a look at, you know, what can we actually accomplish using Eclipse now. And having the vendor come in and do that demonstration was really powerful because they did a great job of explaining, you know, to senior management how powerful the tool could be as well. So we got approval to go ahead and proceed with the implementation. It took us about 2 months in duration. So that was from the initial requirements gathering through to the infrastructure setup, the system configuration, the deployment and the training that we had to do as well. As I said, we really took a look at our project management practices and processes as well. And we also, because we were really focused on resource management and time tracking, you know, what were people working on, we spent a lot of time defining categories of projects. So, you know, whether it's a release on some software that we were working on, or whether it was a new implementation of, I don't know, new financial system or a business process. You know, we really took the time to categorize all of that. And then we also thought that we wanted to, you know, because a lot of the focus was on resource utilization, what are some non-project activities that people work on? Obviously, there's vacation days and there's sick days and, you know, there's conferences, things like that. But there's a lot of day-to-day, keeping the lights on, business as usual, operational type activities that we wanted to get a handle on what people were actually spending their time on. So, you know, we did spend a lot of time defining those requirements. And I would say probably 3 to 4 weeks of a lot of sit-downs and hashing through a lot of those requirements. So in terms of actually a project team dedicated to this, we did have one project manager and we had a business analyst assigned. And then we had the Eclipse implementation specialist that came on site and really helped us with the implementation itself. We had to do, obviously, some communications and messaging because this was going to be a process change, not just for the project management team. I wasn't as concerned about the project managers and the business analysts using Eclipse, the tool itself, because they're familiar with, obviously, projects and how they work and the whole concepts of what was contained within the application itself. But it was more of the casual users that we really wanted to focus on because they would be using it to enter time in. They'd be using it to sort of look at their tasks. So, and they weren't as familiar with a projectized environment. So we really had to spend some time communicating to them, not only how they were going to do things, but why. Why was this important for them? The project management team and the executive team understood the benefits, but we really needed to get the broader-based buy-in from the users. So we spent a lot of time focusing on some communication and some benefits as what was in it for them. We actually implemented in a big bang approach. So we had fine-tuned the configuration. We configured with our Eclipse implementation specialist the way that we wanted things configured, how we were going to categorize projects, how we were going to categorize issues and risks. We had some requirements from our finance department from a management reporting perspective on how they wanted to see work categorized, not only from a department perspective, but also how does it align with business objectives. So we made sure that we configured all of that into Eclipse so that later on we could get the reporting out of the tool that we needed as well. So, again, as with any good project, you spend a lot of time on your requirements and it really helps with your implementation as you move through it. So once we'd fine-tuned all of that, we went through and did some more detailed training for the administrators of the system. There's 3 people that have admin rights. And then, really focused on a process and a documentation overview for the rest of the users as well. So it was quite a successful implementation. Like I said, it took about 2 months, and the PMO team was quite good about making sure they included updates. We did put out some processes saying, okay, project updates need to go in on a weekly basis by Fridays. So we had all of those procedures outlined so that we could do the required reporting that we needed on a timely basis. So as with anything, you need to apply the process as well as the technology. And the IT folks actually administer all of our user IDs. That's all done through the service desk, but we do have the power users and the administrators within our PMO team that actually do all the configuration. If we have a new project in, they will enter that new project and set up all the parameters for us as well. And we've pretty much stuck with that structure in the, almost 8 years now that we've been using Eclipse. The only big change we've done is move to the hosted version in 2011, 2012. So Upland Eclipse had moved to a hosted environment at that point, so we did that conversion as well, which went quite smoothly also. So our results have been very positive. We really have focused our usage of Eclipse around the portfolio management as opposed to the particular project management side of it. Project management is still schedules managed mostly out of MS Project, although Eclipse does have a good scheduling engine as well. Our preference was to keep using MS Project for the time being. Issues and risks, some folks do track them within Eclipse, some do them within other means such as SharePoint. So there's a lot of functionality in there that is very project specific, but our focus really, as I said, was around the resource management and utilization and also the project portfolio management. Is getting much better visibility into the portfolio of projects so that when it came to doing these monthly executive meetings, it was very easy to get the reporting that we needed out of there. It was very consistent. Everybody was using the same nomenclature. Everybody was using the same process to define project health. And then, you know, when I would go in and present, it was very easy for me to say, well, this project is yellow because of X, Y, Z. You know, our criteria is we have some major issues, or that's why it's red and not yellow, because we have that standardization in place there as well. It's also been really beneficial for us to be able to get visibility not just into the projects, but also the operational and steady state activities. So what we do on a yearly basis is go through what we have set up from an operational project perspective to see if anything needs to be changed there, and then we're able to do time tracking and some analysis on what people are working on just from a steady state perspective as well. The project prioritization, this has been very, very helpful because we're able to indicate some categories within the tool itself as to what the priority is. We can also, it's very flexible, we can list in there some business priorities as well as organizational priorities also. So it's enabled us to really fine-tune and align the way our projects are categorized to organizational objectives as well. And the reporting out of it is very easy and flexible. I think the reporting and the resource visibility have been two of the key pieces, and most well received from our executive as well. We're able to report through Eclipse itself. There's a lot of canned reports in there. You can do your own queries as well. And you can also export into Excel and slice and dice and do whatever you need there, and very flexible from that perspective. So if I'm asked for any type of report, it's quite easy for me to pull out of the tool itself. We're also using it quite extensively for financial tracking. Some of the project managers will use it to track their project budgets within the tool itself. Some prefer to use Excel, and you know, we don't insist that they do one or the other. But for some of our larger vendors, what we do is track that once we particularly have a lot of spend within a yearly basis, we will track all of those invoices and spend through Eclipse, and it's been very helpful for us to keep track of all kinds of initiatives we have going on with certain vendors, what our budget is, how much we spent to date, and do a lot of reporting based on the financials as well, and also some forecasting there. And as I said, the time tracking was, you know, one of the key drivers as to why we re-implemented Eclipse, and it's still something that we on a quarterly basis need to run reports for our finance team on, so they can see what our resource utilization looks like as well. As I mentioned, our focus really with Eclipse has been on the portfolio management side of things and the resource tracking side as well. We have on our roadmap plans to more extensively use the tool because there's a lot of functionality in there. We're starting to look at how we can better utilize the project request and evaluation functionality that's in the tool itself. Right now, project requests come through a variety of means: emails, phone calls, you know, hallway conversations. So we want to streamline that a little bit better. Focus perhaps a bit more on task management and schedule management using the Eclipse scheduling engine itself. We'll probably leverage that a little bit more, as well as issues and risks tracking. We do have SharePoint installed at AGF, and so we're starting to look at how we can integrate the two, because there is a nice API and integration with SharePoint. So we want to start to look at how we can integrate those two tools a little more tightly from a document management perspective, and as well as an approval workflow to get that a little bit more standardized across the firm as well. And then resource of forecasting, we want to tighten up a little bit on how we're projecting out what our resources are looking like and our capacity, so we'll be looking to use that a little bit more in Eclipse itself as well. So really, as I said, very, very strong results that we've seen. I think the way I refer to Eclipse when, you know, I'm asked about it is it really is our project book of record. It's our single source of project data, our portfolio of projects, is, if it's not an Eclipse, I say it's not a real project at AGF. So we really, are pushing to use that as our book of record for all of our projects. Our senior management can actually access information they want at any time, and that's quite powerful in that everybody knows that executives can go in at any time and take a look at project status. So it's a really good impetus for people to make sure things are kept on top of and that statuses are accurately recorded, because there's all kinds of levels of eyes on it as well. It allows us to track the operational initiative. So we can look at projects and non-project working time, which has been a great benefit to us to do a little bit more formalized, well, actually a lot more formalized, and to do all of that reporting out of it as well. It's a very flexible tool. It's very easy to configure. You can adapt it to your organization's unique requirements, how you decide to track priorities or objectives. It's very easy to configure. And it's easy to set up new project properties. So if you would like to start tracking a different attribute of a project, it's quite easy for you to be able to set up your own unique project properties. We've done that a fair bit as well, and again, it really helps with our reporting and our categorization of projects as well. Very robust functionality. As I said, we don't leverage it nearly enough. We would like to leverage it more. Upland does a great job of aligning very well with project management best practices. If you go on any of the chats and the sites that are available through the tool, you'll see that it's very aligned with PMI and project management best practices as well. It's a really great online community. We use that a fair bit also to share ideas with people, and how do you manage this? How do you handle that? Do you know how to pull this type of report out of Eclipse? So it's a good opportunity to share with other Eclipse users as well. And the vendor, Upland, and the whole Eclipse team has been very, very reliable in the past, very strong in terms of support, very strong in terms of taking our feedback and applying that to future releases as well. Because we've had, a couple of tweaks that we've requested, and they've made their way into releases. As software as a service, it obviously has to be deployed across the board, but they do a great job of assessing all the new requests and prioritizing them and putting them into future releases as well. So overall, we've had a very strong and positive experience with Eclipse. We started out with fairly unorganized project management group. Again, individually we ran projects really well, reported everything out of spreadsheets, and evolved through defining our processes a little more clearly, having some great executive sponsorship, and then having the benefit of a really good tool that we've evolved now into the current state that we are. We also, early on in the Eclipse implementation, I didn't mention this part, we were pulled out of IT and more broadly placed within the operations organization to better service sort of the business side of the organization, not just the technology side as well. So having Eclipse really helped us broaden as well, and broaden the reach, and allow the different business units to have access to the tool, because other groups that were managing projects on their own now were also able to leverage the consistency and the best practices that we were able to introduce with Eclipse itself. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it back to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Katarina. So I do have quite a few questions. I'm going to ask you the ones that I kind of received more often. And then if you could provide pretty quick answers so that we can get as many people's questions answered as possible, that would be wonderful. So one of the most recent questions was, how did you get the project team members from the business to track time?
Well, we had to, I won't say persuade, but we really had to get the buy-in of their senior leaders. So we had our executive sponsor, and he did a good job of explaining why this was important. So he got his peers buy-in, and then they, passed it down to their team saying, look, this is an organizational initiative now. We all need to do it. So, everybody had to get on board. So it really was top down.
Yeah, so, and most of the time, what we see in implementations is that executive buy-in is key, right? So without
Yeah.
that executive buy-in, it's very hard to make that change needed because there's always cultural resistance to doing something new. So that's important.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
another question. Um, what was the cost difference in the hosted in-house offering? Was it more cost effective to have the hosted service?
Yeah, it was in the end because we didn't have to worry about any of the infrastructure costs, the server costs, any of the upgrade, costs from that standpoint. So it's been much more cost effective for us to go hosted. And I mean, there's also the brown dollars, or it's not the capital expenses for running these things. It's the savings in time and effort internally, because now the vendor worries about the hardware and the infrastructure and keeping all that up to date.
Right. Um, the question, I think we answered this, did you track labor hours in Eclipse or an interface with another system?
We did it with an Eclipse, yeah.
Okay. And then there was a question earlier about um, keeping the PMO running effectively. What data requirements do you have? What do you look at maybe in regards to dashboards constantly to ensure that everything's performing well?
We look at general health, and really, I mean, the project manager can select their own health, but what we'll do is tie it back to the issues as well. So, I ensure that I'm meeting with the project managers regularly to understand what their issues are within the project itself, and then also with the sponsors. So, it's a bit of relationship management from a PMO perspective, in that I need to make sure that the sponsors are all happy with the progress, and if they're concerned of any issues. And I think that's more the art than the science of ensuring things are tracking also, because you can have all the right categories and you can have all of the right processes in place, but at the end of it, have to make sure that the sponsors and the project teams are satisfied with what's happening. So from a governance perspective, I really make sure that I insert myself, and I'm available to ask questions and to meet with the sponsors and the other business groups regularly. So we're in it's not a large organization, so it's fairly easy for me to stay in tune with what's going on directly, but I know I have colleagues in much bigger organizations that do it through proxies, so they'll have somebody on their team that's a little bit more dedicated to staying in touch with a certain line of business, so that person will stay really in tune with what's going on with the area of the business that their project managers are working on. So it's a lot of relationship building too, so that you can hear directly from the sponsors and the stakeholders in the project how things are tracking.
Perfect. And then we had several questions, and I'll take this one on. Several questions about Excel, right? Moving from Excel to a PPM system. This is
Yeah.
very common. Most of the implementations that we see, they are using Excel. And how do you get people to adapt to a new tool versus Excel? For Eclipse PPM specifically, there is an Eclipse Excel add-in, and what that does is it completely helps with that adoption because it exports the data in Excel, and that Excel is basically, if you look at it, as a real-time link. So your users can go use that Excel, interact with that Excel to get the data, and anytime they go into that Excel and they refresh it, it's real-time data. So they can not only use the tool, but they can view their information in Excel, and that helps with that adoption. There was another question, Katarina, about someone being concerned that their projects are aligning with strategy, and to prove that the funds that are invested are actually being returned on projects, so that projects actually have project value. And this is more of a strategic, right? What measures do you take, and how do you ensure that the benefits are being tracked in the
Yeah, that's a That's a great point. And Eclipse allows you to track all of that because it's very flexible. You can configure and you can enter in, this is the expected return on investment, this is the expected sales increase, this is the expected reduction in risk, or reduction in costs. So you can enter all that data in that you would get out of your business case, but then measuring the success of it, that, I'll be honest, we still continue to have challenges with it. So as I said, we do post-implementation reviews, and these are presented with the executives. They tend to be more focused on, how did the project run? Were there any challenges with the project itself? But then one thing that we really want to focus on is getting back to that original business case, and did we actually realize the benefits of what we said we were going to attain through this project? So that piece, we haven't quite gotten there yet. So that's a little bit trickier because, if you've committed to certain sales targets, then sometimes you have to wait a year or two or three even to see those benefits. And certainly you can track that through the tool, but it's developing the discipline. It's not necessarily within the PMO because we can certainly track it and go back to people, but it's developing the discipline as an organization to ensure people are willing to say, okay, yeah, we said we were going to do another $1 million in sales. Have we? No, actually we haven't. So I think that's a lot harder to develop that discipline organizationally. So unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten there yet. The tool's there, as I said, it's very easy for us to track and input, but the actual measurement and getting the business buy-in to agree to do that measurement has been a lot trickier.
Perfect. I can see that we have a couple of questions regarding timeline of such a tool. Katarina touched on this earlier. They had a 2-month implementation. The standard implementation, the way the processes are built around the implementation, is 1 month. So typically it takes 1 month from start to finish to incorporate your processes and get up and running within the new tool. There was another question about providing demos specific to the needs of you on the line. And yes, we can do that. There was a question about Microsoft Project. My Microsoft Project is fully integrated with Eclipse. So yes, you can use Microsoft Project for those. That's actually a key, right? Because you will have seasoned project managers that have used Microsoft Project throughout their entire career. They can continue to do that within Eclipse PPM. We have over, let's see, 15 other questions and they just keep piling in and piling in and piling in. So it sounds like you guys, thank you so much for making this an interactive section. I'm going to continue to go through these questions and answer them as I hand it over to Darren. So Darren, in the sake of time, if you could give them a quick demo, it looks like several people are asking about that. So if you could give a quick demo, that would be wonderful. And I will continue to go through and answer these questions. Thank you, Katarina.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you, Heather, and thank you, Katarina, as well. A few of the things that Katarina talked about, they really focused around centralizing your project information, getting that visibility. A few of the key points that I'm just going to refresh in your mind here are consistent single source for the truth. So getting all that information into one place, and that's where I'm going to start today. Really what we have that we're looking at right here is it's something we call the portfolio summary dashboard. This is where the high-level leadership will often go in so they can actually see the full portfolio, the full details, and that can even include financials. So down the left, we can see a list of projects. So that's really everything we're working on. And I believe Katarina actually made a quote earlier, which was, they internally say, if it's not an Eclipse, it doesn't exist. I really like that quote personally myself. So here we've got a list of all the projects that exist, we'll call it. Now across the top, what we have is a variety of data points. It has been mentioned, these data points, they're configurable. And it's important that you standardize and decide what's the nomenclature you want, what's the definition you want about these different data points, so that really there is the same consistent meaning across the organization. When we say the project health is good, or when we say it's starting to go off track. Again, if you do want to change any of these data points, add anything here, remove anything, even put in some custom information, that is something that's fully configurable in the tool and actually pretty easy to do as well. Now, just to the right of this, we can see the priority, the prioritization of these projects. Obviously, there's going to need to be some decisions that are made about which projects to take on. So when we talk about taking all this visibility that we get with all these centralized projects, what it allows us to do is fully leverage all of our resources. Now, I don't mean just human resources here. I mean also, for example, financial resources. Now, something that came up a few times in the questions was, okay, can we get some visibility into, something maybe beyond budget here? Can we actually get some visibility into, for instance, planned return on investment? And I think one that Katarina mentioned during her presentation was actually the type of the project. And in fact, yes, you could easily add this information in. I'm actually logged in as administrator today, but this would already be all set up for you if you wanted to add in the type, or if you wanted to add in some financials like the planned return on investment in dollars, that would already be set up for you. But for those power users, it's something you can also change on the fly. It's also nice to note this is all drag and drop, so I can actually reposition this so that we can put all our financial items together. Look at our total budget, planned return on investment. Maybe we'd also put in the actual return as well if we want to do a full analysis. We can also group based on these various data points, these various different classifiers. So when we think of the type of project, I can actually get a view where I see different buckets, where I'm seeing how many projects are of each of these different types. And you know what? We can actually summarize this information, seeing subtotals right here that are in blue. So I can see the total budget, total actual amount of money that's been spent, and we could go in and we could configure what's being subtotaled, or even if anything is being subtotaled at all right here. So what that means is you start to get that visibility into all those elements that you need to manage for the projects. At first, what we're looking at here, this is really the information you need to put out fires. Where are things going wrong? You can identify them easily and you can address them. But as time goes on, you might want to do a few other things with more detailed reports, more customizations. Now, one thing that was mentioned by Heather just a moment ago was the Excel add-in. And this is something very particular that's quite useful inside Eclipse. And it's useful in so many different ways, but one of them actually addresses a question that came up earlier about easing people in that process of moving from Excel into Eclipse. So if I actually go into the Excel add-in, you'll notice I've configured something that looks very similar to what we had on our dashboard. So a list of projects down the left, however, now grouped by project owner, and a list of data points across the top. What makes this very different from the Excel files you would already be working with is, of course, first of all, this is automatically generated, but secondly, this is real time. So this Eclipse PPM add that we have, it's actually giving you an additional tab inside of Excel. That allows you to log in, pull in reports as necessary, and refresh those as often as you want. When it does that, it actually maintains all of your formatting. So I've got icons, data bars, heat maps. If I go back and click that refresh button, literally what we do see is we'll actually see that list of projects being refreshed to the newest list that we have available. So it'll actually pull in the newest status updates, the newest health indicators, update our status bars, update our progress, our percent complete. What that means is you don't necessarily need to go in to the application at all to get access to this information. You can do that entirely through Excel as well. So that's really what we call a low friction approach, getting a lot of flexibility in terms of how you would go in, how you would make these updates, how you would make those particular changes to the projects. And there we go. It seems I had a bit of a network issue for a moment there, but we're back. So we've got now, going back into the system, also a way to not just bring up that different information, such as the priorities of the project, such as the financials, but actually to be able to drill in. So I could actually look at any of these projects. I can see at the top of my list here something called Trade Systems Upgrade. I could actually expand that out, seeing what we call a project snapshot. It gives me a little bit more detail about it, or I could actually drill right into that project. And what I'm going to see is going to depend on the type of user I'm logged in, the type of permissions I have. But now what I'm looking at is literally the financial information for the trade systems project. And I'm looking in this case at everything from funding to budget to expenditures and benefits. And as Katarina mentioned earlier, you can get a view of not just the realized benefits as they come in, but right from the beginning, right from the planning phase, you can start to put in what are those expected benefits. And you can, of course, choose how granular you want to get in each of these areas and configure that even different project by project if you like. You can also bring up on screen financial indicators. I'm just going to pin that right on top. This is configurable in terms of what you're showing and not showing as well. Now, one of the other things that was mentioned was, okay, how do we not just get that high-level visibility, but how do we get that data entered in? And I know there was a question around this as well, related to how do you get everyone on board with the time tracking. And I know there was already an answer given to in the organization how that was internally done, but I'm going to actually give you some additional information of what we've seen with other clients out there as well, which is we give multiple different ways for those people working on the projects, working on the tasks, to make those updates, and then they can pick and choose what's appropriate for them. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go into a totally different interface now, something called Eclipse Go. As we go into Eclipse Go, what you're going to see is it's something that's optimized for a smartphone, for tablet, PC. You can actually go in there and you can actually put in information not just of the time tracked, but also of the information about updates to tasks or view information about tasks as well. So I've just opened up my Eclipse Go screen. Here I've got a view of not just the projects I'm working on, which of course is a big part of the work we want to look at, but also the operational workload as well. And we can actually drill in and we can see all of those different elements broken out task by task on our timesheet, track against as necessary. The great thing about doing this in Eclipse Go is you can do this on the go. You can do this from your smartphone, from your tablet PC. So while I'm doing it today on the desktop, we could also do that. And I'm just going to resize my screen here. We could do it in a view that looks just like this. So if you're viewing that on your smartphone or on your tablet, you're going to have those large touch targets to work with. And when you're working on maybe a higher resolution tablet or a desktop PC, you can see more of those interface elements appearing to give you a little bit easier navigation. Now, if we go back to what I was talking about earlier about different approaches, here I've got the option to enter all the information from a timesheet. We could also go in task by task as we're working on those tasks and enter the information for each of those individually. We as well have options to go in through the main application and do much the same thing. So you actually do have here, I'm not going to open it right now in the sake of time, but you do have the option of opening a timesheet here as well. So those users that want to really go into the tool, be very interactive, they can do it. Those users that want to receive those notifications, receive those updates on their smartphone or tablet, they have that as an option as well. Now, one other thing that was mentioned by Katarina was getting the complete portfolio visibility, and I kind of touched on that a little bit in the timesheet by talking about how we have some projects versus operationals, but what does that really mean? Well, a lot of organizations, when they look at the portfolio of projects, what they're really looking at is just the projects themselves. And if you don't consider that KTLO, keep the lights on operations, right? If you don't continue that business as usual, if you don't consider personal time off, personal development and training, what you ultimately run into is the expectation that there's a lot of time available to take on projects that really isn't available at all. Now, in terms of how we can view and manage that in Eclipse, there is a timeline view that allows you to see not just the projects you're working on, but their timing as well. And you can actually even overlay some information there about the resources. So what are the resources working on within those groups? So what we've essentially got here is down the left-hand side of the screen, we've still got one project per line. What we've now got on the right-hand side of the screen is the progress of each of our projects. So I can now see, for example, for technology center setup, how we're doing in terms of where we're expected to be. I can see we're just done 5%, which is showing in green, and we have a fair amount of work upcoming showing in blue. I can, of course, overlay milestones. What I'm going to overlay on top of this, in my case, I'm going to overlay the resource information. So I can look at really an entire team and understand information from so many different perspectives. I can understand how much of that time is being spent on projects for, in this case, a 3-person team, Anna, Darren, and Carolyn. Quite critically, add in that keep the lights on, business as usual, and so forth. That's in the operational workload. That gives me now a full picture of everything these team members are working on. If I want to go a couple of steps further, there's a few other options available. I mean, all these requested, approved, and executing projects, they may need additional project manager resources. If I want to display that demand, I can actually stack that right here, and I can get a picture of, okay, where are we going to run into trouble situations where when we look at the amount of time allocated plus the amount of time demanded, we actually see that exceeding our current capacity. And that opens up conversations. Let's just make some decisions. Do we want to hire contractors or vendors? Do we want to reschedule or move out some of these projects? Or maybe even cancel some. Now there is also another thing that you can see here, which is not just the amount of planned effort, but the amount of actual effort as well. And I've brought that up side by side. So the amount of time that's been tracked against each of these projects, that's also available. Now, one final thing that was mentioned, or I should say 2 final things, were the really detailed resource visibility and also the reporting in Eclipse. Those things are pretty much tied in with a more detailed resource management view that we call the resource management dashboard. What this view allows you to do is get an understanding not just of what each resource is working on, but exactly where they're experiencing bottlenecks. So in this case, I'm still looking at the full view of all of 2015, but I've changed my units to percent. So when I look at the planned time for April, for Carolyn, I can actually see that she's over allocated by 22% of her time. Now, if I wanted to drill in and see why, of course, that is possible. It's very configurable as well. I can drill in here. I can see how much of that time is project versus operational. I can see what projects. I can even see what tasks. And if necessary, I could take any of these projects, such as this technology center upgrade, and I could reassign that to other resources. In this case, you'll notice about 40 and 50% of Darren's time available here, so we might want to do that type of a reassignment. Now, just as I was opening this, I did mention the other final thing I wanted to talk about, which is reporting. It's not just getting this information to the right people in the system and making it easily accessible, easily available to them, but it's also making that reporting easy to access and easy to use. So you'll notice we have the option to do various extracts from our dashboards, to run various reports. And in my case, I'm just going to run what we call a quick HTML extract of this resource management information. You could actually use this to publish to various different areas in your organization. You could put this link on a SharePoint site, for example, and allow that to be quick and easy access for various different people. Another option, of course, would be to go into what we call the Excel add-in. And here what you're able to do is you can actually run a variety of reports, and that can include information about, for example, the resources. Now, I've actually run a quick report earlier. What I did is I pulled in all of the resource information, and you'll notice this is really an extract of everything. What we want to do is be able to manipulate, to summarize this. We talked about viewing the resource in a variety of different ways, by the project type, by the amount of utilization. And you know what? When I have this information in here together with pivot tables, I can quickly and easily build a report. And this is something that I only need to do one time. So I might want to know what's the name of the project. I might want to know, let's say, what the type of the project is. We mentioned that. I might want to know what's the amount of time we've allocated to this. And I might want to know how much we've actually used. So here's where I'm going to be able to see project type, by project type with those project names. And you know what? I'd like to get, in this case, maybe some resource names as well. So let's bring that in. So I could actually, let's do just resources and project types. Here I can actually see how much time was planned versus actually used for each of those resource types. And if I want, I can chart based on that as well. Again, this is something I build one time. I can refresh this on the fly as often as necessary. I can also set this up so that we can collapse down various pieces of information I might not be interested in seeing the full detail on. So if I just wanted to see overall for Anna, Darren, and Carolyn, what's the actual versus the planned time, here I can see that on my chart, or I can drill in, and that's something you just do one time. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hand it back to Katarina and Heather to do a quick wrap up, to do a quick summary here.
Perfect.
As well.
Thanks, Darren. And you know what, Darren, Kim asked a question that I assigned to you, so if you could answer that question. Katarina, we'll go ahead and put the last slide up on so they can have their PDU information, and then meanwhile, I am going